The wedding that should never have happened. On my wedding night, my husband held me in his arms and whispered, "You look exactly like my mother." I smiled, thinking it was a strange but harmless thing to say. I didn't know that those words would soon destroy every illusion I ever had about love, about family, and about who I truly was. My name is Claire. I was 26 when I got married. I'd grown up in foster care, moved between homes, always feeling like a misplaced puzzle piece. My mother had died when I was just a baby, at least that's what I'd been told, and my father had disappeared long before that. No photos, no records, no trace of him in any file. So when I met Daniel, I thought I'd finally found my place in the world. He was calm, confident, older, 42, with that quiet kind of authority that makes you feel protected. He had soft eyes, but carried something heavy behind them, something I mistook for depth. Maybe it was guilt. We met at a charity event. He was one of the organizers. I was a guest working for a local design firm that had donated art pieces. I remember the first time he shook my hand, firm, warm, lingering, just a second too long. We talked all night. He told me about his life, his career in real estate, his love of classic music. I told him about growing up without parents, about my dreams of stability. He listened with the kind of focus I'd never experienced before, as if every word I said mattered. When he said, "You remind me of someone I lost," I felt my heart pull toward him. I thought he meant a lover. Later, I'd realize he meant something else entirely. Our relationship moved fast, too fast looking back. Within 6 months, we were engaged. My friends told me to slow down, but Daniel made me feel safe, grounded. He was everything my childhood hadn't been: steady, predictable, gentle. He treated me like I was precious, like I'd been missing from his life for years, and he'd finally found me again. When we married, in a small, sunlit chapel surrounded by his business colleagues and a few of my foster family acquaintances, I thought I was walking into a fairy tale. But fairy tales always have curses hidden in their beauty. After the wedding, we moved into his large suburban home, a place filled with quiet rooms and the faint smell of cologne and old wood. There were photographs on the walls. Daniel with colleagues, Daniel at various events, Daniel standing beside an elegant woman with light brown hair and eyes not unlike mine. "That was my mother," he said when I asked. "She passed away when I was a teenager." I remember staring at her photo longer than I should have. Something about her face, her jawline, her nose, her expression felt eerily familiar. I shrugged it off as coincidence. The first few months were peaceful. Too peaceful. Daniel worked long hours, but always came home for dinner. He was affectionate, thoughtful, almost obsessively so. Sometimes, when I cooked, he'd watch me from across the table with this strange softness, like he wasn't seeing me, but someone else through me. I used to joke, "You look at me like you're memorizing my face." He'd just smile and say, "Maybe I am." There were little things that unsettled me. The way he flinched whenever I mentioned my childhood. How he changed the subject when I asked about his parents. Once, when I found an old box of letters in the attic, all addressed to Margaret, he snatched it from my hands and said, "Some memories are better left alone." I remember the way his voice trembled, how quickly his mood shifted. It was the first time I saw fear in him, real fear. Still, I ignored the warning signs. Love makes you blind, or maybe it makes you willfully ignorant. I told myself, everyone has secrets. I didn't want to lose the only person who'd ever made me feel wanted. Then, one night, about 5 months after our wedding, I woke up to the sound of the piano downstairs. Daniel was playing. He didn't know I was listening. The melody was slow, sorrowful, a lullaby I'd never heard before, or thought I hadn't. But as I stood at the top of the stairs, something inside me shifted. My skin prickled. I knew that song. I didn't know how, but I did. I could hum every note. It was the same tune that haunted my dreams when I was a child. A lullaby I couldn't explain, one I used to hum to myself in the dark of the orphanage. When he finished, he whispered softly into the empty air. "She still remembers." I froze. The words hit me like a wave. Who was he talking about? And how could he possibly know the song from my dreams? The next morning, I pretended nothing happened. But from that day on, something inside me changed. Every gesture, every word, every look he gave me began to feel heavier, loaded, with meanings I couldn't understand. His affection now felt almost obsessive, possessive. When we kissed, I could sense restraint in him, like he was fighting something, not lust, but guilt. I started avoiding his eyes. And then, a week later, I received a letter. No return address, no name, just a single sentence written in neat handwriting. "You married your father." At first, I laughed. It was absurd. A cruel joke, maybe from someone who envied us? But when I showed it to Daniel, his face went pale. His hand trembled as he took the paper, and instead of anger, there was recognition. He folded it carefully, too carefully, and whispered, "Don't let this get in your head, Claire. People will do anything to hurt what they don't understand." He burned the letter that night in the fireplace. I watched the flames eat the paper, the ink turning to smoke. But even after the fire died, the words lingered, echoing in my mind, whispering when I tried to sleep. "You married your father." I wanted to believe it was nonsense, but deep down, something inside me already knew it wasn't. Because ever since that night, when I looked at Daniel, I began to see myself reflected in his face. The same eyes, the same line of the jaw, the same dimple that appeared when he forced a smile. And from that moment on, I knew something was terribly, terribly wrong. After the letter, the world didn't look the same anymore. Even the sunlight that slipped through our curtains felt strange, filtered, distorted, like it was hiding something. I started watching Daniel the way a detective studies a suspect. Every word he spoke, every look he gave me became a clue. He noticed. Of course he did. "Claire," he said one morning over coffee, "you've been quiet lately." I smiled, just tired. He reached across the table, his thumb brushing my hand. "Don't let people get inside your head."
"You know me better than anyone." The way he said it, "You know me better than anyone," made my stomach twist. Because suddenly, I wasn't sure if that was true, or if it ever had been. Days turned into weeks. I tried to forget the letter, to bury it under work, routines, dinner plans. But it kept finding me, in my dreams, in fragments of memory that didn't make sense. A face I couldn't recall but somehow recognized. The faint sound of that piano lullaby echoing behind closed doors. Then came the phone call. It was a Thursday afternoon. Daniel was at work. I was home alone when the landline, the one nobody ever used, rang. "Hello?" I answered. Silence. Then a woman's voice, trembling. "Claire?" "Yes. Who's this?" A pause. I could hear faint breathing on the other end. Then, softly, "You need to leave that house." My throat tightened. I'm sorry, who is this?" But she hung up before I could ask again. For a long time, I stood there, staring at the phone, listening to the dial tone hum like a heartbeat. I wanted to call Daniel, but something stopped me. Instead, I walked upstairs, into the room he'd forbidden me to enter, the study. The door was locked, of course, but Daniel wasn't as careful as he thought. One of the windows had a loose latch. I climbed in from the patio. The air inside felt different, colder, heavier. On his desk sat a leather-bound notebook. Inside, pages of names, dates, and photographs of women, all labeled with initials. But one photo made my blood freeze. It was me. Younger, maybe 17 or 18. A photo I didn't remember ever taking. Standing in front of a foster home. My name written underneath in his handwriting. Claire M. And below that, a note. DNA pending. Possible match. When Daniel came home that night, I couldn't speak. He kissed me on the forehead like nothing was wrong, poured himself a drink, and started talking about work. His voice sounded far away, like static. I sat there, numb, nodding when he spoke. Inside, everything was unraveling. Later, when we went to bed, he wrapped his arm around me. I wanted to scream, to ask, but the words wouldn't come out. Instead, I lay there, staring into the dark, listening to his breathing, steady, calm. The breathing of a man who thought his secret was safe. That night, I dreamt again of the piano, and a man humming that same lullaby, cradling a baby in his arms. My baby self. And when he turned to face me, it was Daniel. The next morning, I confronted him. "Who took that photo of me?" I asked. He blinked. "What photo?" "The one in your study." For a moment, everything in him froze. Then his expression softened into that familiar calm. "Claire, you shouldn't have gone in there. Answer me." He sighed, rubbed his forehead, as if tired. "I've known about you longer than you think. He hesitated, was helping with your adoption records years ago. I made sure you were safe." It almost sounded believable, except for the look in his eyes. It wasn't compassion, it was ownership. "Why would you keep my photo?" "Because," he said quietly, "I wanted to find you." "Find me for what?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for my hand. I pulled back. Something inside me broke then, a small, irreversible crack. I packed a bag that night and told him I needed space. He didn't argue. He just stood in the doorway, watching me, that same faint smile on his lips. "Be careful, Claire," he said. "Sometimes the truth hurts more than lies." I moved into a motel near the edge of town. But even there, I couldn't escape the feeling that someone was watching me. Every knock on the door made my heart race. Every phone ring made my hands shake. One night, I received an envelope slipped under the door. No words inside, just a folded piece of paper with a birth certificate. My birth certificate. And under father's name, written clearly, Daniel Whitmore. That's when I screamed. Everything went dark for a while after that. The next memory I have is of sitting on the bathroom floor, clutching the paper, my breath uneven. I don't remember how long I sat there. Minutes, hours, maybe days. But when I finally looked in the mirror, I saw it. The undeniable resemblance. The eyes, the nose, the shape of the mouth. It had been there all along. I just never wanted to see it. I didn't sleep for 3 days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, and that line on the certificate. Father's name, Daniel Whitmore. I kept telling myself it was some mistake, a cruel prank, a forgery, anything but the truth. But the truth doesn't care about what you believe. I went back to the house one last time, not to see him, but to search. I waited until he left for work, then let myself in through the back door. My hands shook the entire time. The place still smelled like him, cologne and whiskey, and something darker underneath, like iron. In his study, I found a locked drawer I hadn't noticed before. The key wasn't hard to find. He was arrogant that way. Inside were medical files, DNA reports, letters from the adoption agency, and one photograph that made my blood turn cold. It was a hospital photo, a baby wrapped in white cloth. A nurse's note pinned beside it read, "Infant, female, transferred to foster care 1996. And beside it, scribbled in Daniel's handwriting, "Mine." I ran out of that house like it was burning. That night, I checked into another motel, this time under a fake name. I didn't tell anyone where I went. I couldn't. Who would believe me? Who could understand what I was even trying to say? That I had married my own father, unknowingly, and shared his bed for years? No one would believe that kind of horror. I barely believed it myself. But I had to be sure. I had to know. So I ordered a DNA test, 2 samples, mine and Daniel's, taken from a toothbrush I'd stolen from the bathroom before I left. When the results came back 3 days later, I sat in silence for almost an hour before I opened the email. 99.98% probability of paternity. I remember hearing a sound, a low, broken scream, and it took me a moment to realize it came from me. My hands went numb. My body shook so hard I dropped the phone. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't move. I just kept whispering, "No, no, no." The walls of the motel room seemed to close in. The air was too thick to breathe. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, became unbearable. I curled up on the floor, clutching my chest, and stayed there until morning. When Daniel found me, I didn't even ask how. He always found me. He knocked once, then walked in, like he owned the place. Calm.
Like nothing about this was strange. "You shouldn't have done that," he said quietly. He stepped closer. "You've hurt yourself chasing ghosts. You don't understand how things really are." I laughed, or maybe I cried. It came out sounding like both. "You're my father," he sighed, as if I'd said something childish. "And what does that even mean? Biology? Blood? Claire, I raised you into the woman you are. Everything you've become, that's because of me." "Stop," I said, backing away. "Don't touch me." He tilted his head. "You think you can erase what we have because of a word on a paper? You're sick." He smiled faintly. "Love doesn't follow rules, Claire. It never has." I screamed at him then, words I barely remember, through the phone, the lamp, anything I could reach. He didn't flinch, just stood there, watching, as if memorizing the moment. Then he said, softly, "You'll come back. You always do." And then he left. After that, everything fell apart. I quit my job without notice. I stopped eating. I stayed locked inside that motel, curtains drawn, terrified he'd come back. I changed my phone number, my email, my name. But even then, I felt him everywhere, in the shadows, in my thoughts, in the reflection that stared back at me from the mirror. One night, I woke to a knock on the door. I froze. A voice followed, soft, familiar. "Claire, open the door. Please, I just want to talk." "Daniel." I didn't move. He knocked again, harder this time. "You can't hide from the truth. We belong together. That's what fate decided." I covered my ears, whispering over and over, "Go away, go away." After a long silence, I heard his footsteps fade. When I finally opened the door, there was an envelope on the floor.
Inside was a photo, the two of us on our wedding day, and on the back, in his handwriting, "You can't undo love." That night, I decided I had two choices: run or end it all. But before I could do either, I received another letter from the same anonymous sender who'd warned me to leave before. Inside was a single line: "You're not the only one he's done this to." The words hit like a knife. Not the only one? There were others. And that's when my fear turned into something else, something sharper. I wasn't going to be his victim anymore. I was going to find the others, and I was going to make him pay. I didn't recognize the person I'd become. There was a time when I was gentle, trusting, naive maybe, but that version of me had died the night I opened that DNA report. What remained was a hollow, shaking creature driven by one thing only: to understand why. Why had he done it? Why me? The anonymous letter replayed in my mind every night. "You're not the only one he's done this to." Those words became my oxygen, poisonous, addictive, impossible to ignore. If there were others, I had to find them. I started with the adoption agency. The first time, they refused to talk to me. "Records are sealed," they said. "We can't disclose details." The second time, I went in person. I told them my husband had died and I needed his files for closure. I was shaking so badly, I almost dropped my fake ID. The clerk, a woman in her 60s, looked at me for a long moment, then quietly disappeared into a back room. When she returned, she slipped me a thin folder across the desk. She didn't speak, but her eyes told me she knew. Inside were names. 4 of them. All women. All former foster children. All placed in homes funded by the Whitmore Foundation. My blood turned to ice. He'd funded his own hunting ground? Over the next week, I tracked them down one by one. Some numbers were disconnected, some addresses no longer existed. But I found one, Evelyn. She was older than me, maybe late 30s, living 2 towns over. When I called, I could hear the hesitation in her voice, the same quiet tremor I'd heard in my own. When I mentioned Daniel's name, she went silent for a long time. Then she whispered, "Come alone." Evelyn met me in a diner off the highway, the kind of place that smelled like burnt coffee and tired secrets. She looked fragile but fierce, like someone who had been broken and glued back together too many times. When I told her my story, she didn't look surprised. She just nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "He finds us young," she said. "Always the same type. Alone, vulnerable. He makes you feel seen, like you finally matter. And by the time you realize what he's doing, it's too late." My throat tightened. Did you marry him too?" Her laugh was dry, empty. "Not officially. He doesn't always marry them. Sometimes he just keeps them close, sponsors them, dates them. And when he's done, he disappears, starts over somewhere else." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "I did," she said. "No one believed me. He's powerful, Claire. He knows how to look like the hero, the charming philanthropist, the loving husband." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He's not just your father, Claire. He's done this before." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. "Before?" I echoed. She nodded. "You weren't his first daughter." That night, I drove home in silence. The road lights blurred through my tears. Somewhere between disbelief and rage, something inside me snapped. All the years of confusion, all the moments I'd brushed off as strange, they came rushing back. How he always avoided talking about his past, how he flinched at questions about family, how his affection sometimes felt rehearsed, like he was playing a role. And then I remembered the night he proposed, the way he'd looked at me when I said yes. There had been relief in his eyes, not joy. Relief because I didn't know. The next morning, I stood outside his house. I didn't plan it. My body just took me there. I watched through the living room window as he poured himself a drink, calm, unhurried, like a man who thought he'd won.
I wanted to storm inside, scream, destroy everything he'd ever touched, but I didn't. Instead, I took out my phone and started recording. His face, his routine, his solitude. That was when I noticed the photographs on the mantle, not just ours. 4 others, different women, all smiling beside him. Evelyn was right. He kept trophies. Days passed. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every minute felt like an hour, every shadow like his presence lurking. I started hearing things, whispers when I was alone, footsteps behind me on empty streets. I told myself I was imagining it, but deep down, I knew. He was watching me. Then came the phone call, unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something in me knew it was him. His voice was smooth, careful. "Why are you digging into my life, Claire?" My hands trembled. "Because you destroyed mine."
You're making this worse for yourself. I'm not afraid of you anymore. He chuckled softly. Of course you are. You always will be. And then he hung up. I spent that night sitting on the bathroom floor, staring at my reflection in the cracked mirror. I didn't look like myself anymore. My eyes hollow, my skin pale, my hair matted. I whispered to my reflection, "You can't keep running. End this." And that's when I decided I would expose him. Not just to the police, they wouldn't believe me without proof. No, I'd expose him publicly. I began gathering everything, the documents, photos, DNA tests, recordings. I reached out to the other women again, urging them to come forward. Some were terrified, others silent, but a few agreed. We'd reveal him together. The night before I planned to go public, I received a final message. It was from Daniel, a video file. In it, he was sitting in his chair, smiling directly at the camera. "Claire," he said softly, "you've forgotten who made you who you are. You're not the victim here. You're my creation." Then he leaned closer, his eyes burning into mine through the screen. "If you expose me, I'll expose you." The video ended, but the implication hung heavy. He had something about me, something that could ruin everything. I felt the storm rising, the moment before lightning hits. This wasn't over, not yet. Not until one of us was destroyed. The night before it all happened, the world felt too quiet, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I hadn't slept. I couldn't. Every heartbeat echoed like a countdown. I had everything prepared. The photos, the adoption papers, the recorded confession from Evelyn, the DNA results. It was all laid out on my living room floor. Each piece of evidence like a piece of my own flesh torn away. By morning, I'd made my decision. There would be no more hiding, no more silence. I was going to destroy Daniel Whitmore, the man who called himself my husband, the man who was, by blood, my father. It began at the charity gala, the same event where we'd first met 2 years ago. A shimmering hall filled with cameras, press, and high society smiles. Daniel stood at the center of it all, confident, radiant, shaking hands with politicians and donors, his voice calm, his laughter rehearsed. He looked untouchable. But that night, I wasn't there to be touched. I was there to burn it all down. I entered wearing black. Not the elegant, flattering kind, but a statement, a shadow. People whispered as I passed. Maybe they sensed something, the rage vibrating beneath my skin. I waited until he stepped on stage. He was giving his usual speech about protecting vulnerable children, about family being sacred.
Those words twisted in my gut like knives. When he said, "Every child deserves a father's love," I couldn't take it anymore. I walked straight to the stage. He froze mid-sentence, his smile faltering for the first time. The cameras turned toward me. Dozens of phones rose into the air, recording. Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. "Tell them," I said, my voice shaking but loud. "Tell them who you really are, Daniel." He blinked, trying to smile again. "Claire, sweetheart, this isn't the—" "Don't you dare call me that." The room murmured. Someone whispered, "Is this part of the event?" I raised my phone, projecting his video message on the massive LED screen behind us. "If you expose me, I'll expose you." His voice echoed across the hall. Gasps rippled through the crowd. He turned to me sharply, his calm mask beginning to crack. "You don't know what you're doing," he hissed under his breath. "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said. "You're my father." The silence that followed was unbearable. Even the camera stopped clicking. Then chaos. People started shouting, some rushing forward, others backing away in horror. Daniel tried to grab the mic, but I stepped between him and the podium, shoving the printed DNA report into the air. "This is proof. He's my biological father. He married me. He lied to everyone." Gasps, screams, the sound of security radios crackling. He turned to me, desperate now. "That's not true. She's unstable. She's making this up." "Then explain this," I interrupted, tapping the screen to reveal the photos I'd taken of his hidden room, the shelves lined with portraits of other women, his projects. The crowd's shock turned to disgust. The media lights flickered like lightning. And then Evelyn stepped out from the audience. "I was one of them," she said, voice trembling but clear. "He did the same to me, and others. He's a predator." It was over. He knew it. I could see it in his eyes. That flicker of realization when the web finally collapses. Still, he tried one last time. He reached for me, whispering hoarsely, "You don't understand, Claire. I did this for us. I wanted to protect you." "Protect me?" I laughed, tears blurring my vision. "You stole my childhood. You ruined my life. You made me love you." For a moment, he just stared at me, something monstrous flickering behind his calm exterior. Then he turned to the crowd, his voice trembling now. I didn't know. She wanted this." The crowd erupted in outrage. Security moved in. Reporters shouted questions. And somewhere in that chaos, I saw the man I'd once loved. The man who raised me, without ever telling me the truth, being dragged off stage, screaming my name. The following hours were a blur of flashing lights, police statements, and endless questions. Every word I spoke felt like another wound reopening. The press was relentless. Wife discovers husband is her biological father. Philanthropist exposed a secret abuser. My face was everywhere. So was his. That night, I went home and locked myself in the dark. The silence felt like a punishment. I could still hear his voice in my head, calm, paternal, deceiving. "You're not the victim, Claire. You're my creation." I stared at my reflection again, the same face I'd seen in him all along, the same eyes, the same blood. Then came the call from the police. Daniel had confessed, partially. Enough to confirm everything. Enough to destroy what was left of my world. But there was one thing I hadn't expected. He'd left behind a letter, addressed to me. It arrived the next day. No return address, just my name, written in his neat, familiar handwriting. I held it for hours before opening it. Inside was a single page. You were the only one who made me feel alive. I gave you everything I could, my name, my home, my love. Don't say it was all wrong, because to me, it was the only thing that ever felt right. There was no apology, no guilt, just delusion. I tore the letter apart, burned it, watched the paper curl and blacken until only ash remained. And then, for the first time in years, I screamed, a sound so raw it scared me. It wasn't just grief, it was release.
Everything I'd buried, the pain, the disgust, the love twisted into horror, came pouring out. He was gone, but the scars he left behind would never fade. The next morning, the news announced his death. They said it was suicide, found in his cell, silent and alone. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just stood by the window, staring at the sky, feeling the weight of a truth too heavy to carry. The man who destroyed me was gone, but his shadow would live inside me forever. It's been 11 months since Daniel's death. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, other times like yesterday. The house is quiet now too quiet. His scent is long gone, but I still catch it in the creases of old curtains or the faint echo of his voice on old voicemails I can't bring myself to delete. The tabloids moved on months ago. The world found a new scandal to feed on, but the internet never forgets. Sometimes strangers still message me, some with pity, some with disgust. Others call me names I won't repeat. They don't understand that I was never complicit. I was crafted, molded into his perfect illusion of love. I started therapy. At first, I hated it. The silence in those sessions felt like a trap, like being forced to relive everything I'd fought to bury. But over time, I realized something. I wasn't just mourning him. I was mourning the version of myself that died with him. Dr. Evans once told me, healing isn't about forgetting the monster. It's about recognizing that the monster was never you. I carry that line like armor. Every morning, I visit the lake near my mother's old house, the one Daniel never knew about. It's peaceful there. Birds, mist, the soft hum of water against the shore. I bring a single flower, not for him, but for the child I once was, the girl who never got to grow up free. I whisper to her, "You're safe now." A few weeks ago, the police reopened 2 of Daniel's old foundation projects, both involving adopted youth outreach. They uncovered multiple falsified records, payments, and unregistered adoptions. He wasn't just my tragedy. He was a network of others. The thought makes me sick, but it also gives me purpose. So I joined a victim support organization under a different name. I speak to women, and sometimes men, who've survived psychological abuse, grooming, manipulation. Every story sounds different, yet they all echo the same theme: love turned into a weapon. And every time I help someone speak for the first time, I feel like I'm taking back a piece of myself. But healing isn't linear. Some nights I wake up screaming, my chest tight, my voice hoarse, the taste of his name on my tongue. Sometimes I still feel his hand on my shoulder in dreams, whispering, "You'll never be free of me." And maybe that's true. Maybe I won't ever be fully free. But I've stopped trying to erase him. Instead, I'm learning to live with the shadow and not let it consume me. Last week, I returned to the city for the first time since everything happened. The skyline looked the same.
sharp, cold, glittering with the same hypocrisy that once blinded me. I walked past the hotel where we had our first anniversary dinner. The lights still shimmered gold through the windows. Couples were laughing inside, toasting to futures they believed in. I didn't go in. I just stood across the street, watching for a while, then whispered to myself, "It's over." And for the first time, I meant it. Before leaving, I visited his grave. A simple stone, no flowers, just a name. Daniel Whitmore, 1968-2023. Someone I don't know who had placed a single red rose there. I didn't touch it. Instead, I crouched beside the grave and said quietly, "You don't own me anymore." The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the grass, and for a second, it felt like the earth itself exhaled. Then I turned and walked away. No tears, no rage, just silence, the kind that feels like peace. Epilogue: The price of survival. I've learned that truth doesn't set you free. It breaks you open, forces you to rebuild from the shards. But in those fragments, you find something unbreakable: yourself. I'm not Claire Whitmore anymore. That name died with him. I changed it, started over. No spotlight, no pity, no chains. Some nights, when I sit by the lake and the moon hits the water just right, I whisper one last time, "Dad, husband, monster, whatever you were, I survived you." And the ripples take the words away, dissolving them into the dark, until nothing remains but quiet water and the faint sound of wings returning home. It's been 3 years since Daniel's death. I live quietly now, under a different name, in a small town where no one knows my story. Here, I'm not the girl who married her father. I'm just Anna, a woman who runs a modest flower shop by the river. Every morning, I open the shop before sunrise. The smell of lilies and soil greets me, soft, grounding, forgiving. It's funny, isn't it? The same hands that once trembled with guilt and shame now create beauty every day. Sometimes I think the flowers bloom because of the pain, not in spite of it. I don't talk about Daniel anymore, not out of fear, but because I've learned that some ghosts only fade when left unspoken. He still appears in dreams sometimes, never as a monster though, always smiling, charming, just like the man I fell in love with. And in those dreams, I'm not angry. I just watch, because I finally understand something I couldn't before. Evil doesn't always arrive wearing a mask. Sometimes it comes wrapped in love, gentle, patient, convincing. When people ask why I moved here, I tell them I wanted peace. That's only half true. I wanted forgiveness from myself most of all. I still remember the day I found the courage to read the rest of my mother's letters. They were old, brittle, almost unreadable. In them, she spoke about her regret, how she'd once loved Daniel too, how she'd left him when she discovered what he was becoming. Her words broke me all over again. If you ever meet someone who makes you feel both safe and terrified, run, my darling, because that kind of love doesn't heal, it devours. I never understood what she meant until I saw my reflection in his eyes. A few months ago, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single photograph of me, as a child, sitting on Daniel's lap. Behind us was a young woman I didn't recognize. On the back, in faded ink, it said, "She knew too." For a moment, my heart stopped. Was there another person who helped him hide it? Another piece of this twisted puzzle I never saw? I thought about going to the police, about reopening the past, but I didn't. Some truths don't need more light. They burn everything they touch.
So I burned the letter instead, watched it curl and turn to ash in the sink, the smoke rising like memory, then disappearing. Sometimes customers at the flower shop ask why I never married again. I just smile and say, "Once was enough." They laugh, thinking it's a joke. I let them. But in truth, I've learned that love isn't something I can chase anymore. It's something I build quietly, in small, safe ways. In the flowers I plant, in the kindness I give strangers, in the mirror when I tell the woman staring back at me that she's still here, and that's enough. One afternoon, a teenage girl came into the shop. She looked scared, fragile, like someone who hadn't slept in days. She asked if she could sit for a while. I nodded, handed her tea, said nothing. After a few minutes, she whispered, "He says he loves me, but he scares me." Those words froze my blood. I didn't ask who he was. I didn't need to. I just told her, if love makes you afraid, it isn't love. It's control dressed as affection. She cried. And in that moment, I realized why I'm still here. Not to hide from my past, but to use it. To make sure no one else falls into the same trap of love and ruin. Daniel's story ended the night he died. Mine didn't. It simply began again, quieter, smaller, but truer. I think people expect redemption to look grand, like fireworks after the storm. But it doesn't. It looks like a woman planting seeds in the dirt, trusting they'll bloom, even when she doesn't believe in beauty anymore. A few nights ago, I walked to the river. The moon was full, the water silver and still. I sat on the old bench by the edge and whispered, "I forgive you." Not because he deserved it, but because I did. And as the wind carried the words away, I felt something I hadn't in years: freedom. Now, when I close the shop each evening, I light a candle by the window. Not for him, not for me, but for all the others like me. For every woman or man who ever woke up to a nightmare wearing love's face. For everyone who survived what should have broken them. If you're watching this, listening to my story, I want you to know something. You can't rewrite the beginning, but you can choose how it ends. Because I did marry my real father without knowing it, but I also walked away knowing who I really am. And for the first time in my life, that truth doesn't destroy me.